Hey friends, welcome back to Heretical Hippies, where Anna and Kari Jo wander back into the wreckage of their deconstruction to see if they can offer hope to anyone else who might be climbing out of the dust and ashes of their faith. Buckle up, it's about to get real.
Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about our top 5 influences. Hello, Kari Jo.
Hey Anna, excited to share some of the resources.
Good. I'm excited to hear too, because you're going to be the first person to share with us. So
Yay.
I know you had 5 originally, and this morning when we were chatting, you added another because you were like, oh, there's another one. And we both realized this is a really hard challenge to just narrow it down to 5.
Nearly impossible. I mean, I felt like I was leaving out so many strong players in my journey by narrowing it down to 6. And the interesting thing to me, when you and I were sharing what our influences were with each other, we have very different influences, perhaps little to no overlap, which was fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But again, it makes
There's a
sense
lot
because
of good content out there.
so much good content, and something's going to speak differently to everyone because of our specific, unique journeys.
Right.
So I want to remind that to our listeners to realize that you may check out these resources that Anna and I are sharing and realize, well, that's shit. I didn't like any of that. And that's okay. That's a valid response. You're allowed to explore and discover what resonates with you.
Right.
And it is a process. So, okay, I will start by sharing. I have 2 books, 1 Instagram account, 2 podcasts. Well, actually 3 podcasts, but the 6th one for me was a person. And I'll start by sharing the books. The first one, the title is called Inspired, and it is written by Rachel Held Evans. And I want to share a quote on the back of the book that actually pretty beautifully sums up its impact on my journey. And this is a quote by Pete Enns, which happens to be the host of one of my podcasts that I'm sharing. So it all ties back together. So Pete says, Rachel gives many the language and permission they desperately need to leave behind their guilt and fear and to read the Bible anew with the joyful anticipation the sacred book deserves. So that, yes, in a nutshell, sums up my experience. However, I will say this was probably one of the first books that I read that really challenged me in my understanding of biblical inerrancy. I was an inerrantist. I thought the Bible was without damage, should we say, no errors. It was infallible. And I decided, okay, I'm going to take the leap. I was told anything Rachel Held Evans writes is heresy, and you shouldn't expose yourself to it. And so I was a good little girl, and I didn't. And then I started down this journey, and I was thinking, okay, something about this concept is interesting to me. And then my therapist recommended the book too. So I was like, okay, that's all I need. I needed somebody that I respected that has read it and is still living to tell the story. So it enabled me to actually pursue reading this. So when I ordered it on Amazon, I remember feeling very weird. I was like, okay, I guess I'm doing it. I'm jumping in the heresy lane. Let's see what happens. And here we are, heretical hippies. So I'd say it led to a very, very amazing path and experience. So she gave me permission, like Pete said in the quote, to really question the Bible. And once I gave, or I guess received that permission to question the accuracy, inerrancy, whatever phrase you want to use to describe that, it allowed me to look at everything else I was taught and believed and look at it critically and look at it historically, not just look at it as something I was spoon-fed and I took on without question. So that was huge. And I believe that that attitude of curiosity that she instilled in me in that book has carried through this entire journey and will till the day I die. Because it's important to be curious. It's important to look into things a little bit deeper, try to make sense of it.
Yeah, unfortunately, she died early in life from an infection. She was 37, but in her short life, she really did inspire so many people to think outside the box.
Yes, and I'm so grateful for her life, her one small life, the way she used it, and it's still being used to influence people. I
Mhm.
love that. I love that she wrote books. I love that she got it down because books kind of live forever and people can be challenged and encouraged through her still. So she lives on. And for me, I feel like she's still alive because of how profoundly she's touched my life with her work. And I do share to people who ask, what are some books that you'd recommend? I definitely share this book, Inspired, because it is inspired and it gives you like a new lens to view the scripture with. And at that time in my life, in this deconstruction process, I needed that. So that was huge for me.
Yeah, Emma Green, wrote in The Atlantic, that Evans was part of a vanguard of progressive Christian women who fought to change the way Christianity is taught and perceived in the United States. That's she made a really big impact. That's
She
pretty
did
profound.
in 37 years.
Yeah,
I mean, come on.
so beautiful.
It's inspiring. It is really incredible.
Mhm. It is inspiring.
Yeah. So thank you, Rachel Held Evans. You are amazing. We love you. You
Awful.
are hovering over us, I know.
Absolutely.
Okay. My second book is called God Can't, and it is by Thomas J. Oord. And the subtext to the title is How to Believe in God and Love After Tragedy, Abuse, and Other Evils. This was really powerful for me because one of my main, what do I call it? One of my main hurdles of the faith, the entire duration of my Christian life, was prayer and petitionary prayer and asking God for really good things. And then those prayers don't get answered.
Mhm.
But somebody else asks for God to bring their kitten back and the cat comes back. And I'm not saying that's not important and that's not good, but how does that take precedence over somebody's 4-year-old dying of cancer? I
Right.
could never make sense of the suffering and even the evils. I mean, those aren't evils necessarily, but I struggled so deeply with trying to make sense with God being a loving God and these things happening or being allowed to happen. It basically says that God can't control those things. And
Amen.
so it's called open and relational theology. If this is interesting to you, you can look more into that. But basically, it states that God is not capable of controlling these things. God
Amen.
cannot just reach out and like magic wand cure someone of something or heal someone of fill in the blank. But sometimes our bodies, the way that they work, the way that we can use modern medicine, sometimes these things can come across as a miraculous answer to prayer. And it really enabled me to see God not as a jerk, basically. And it just made sense to me. It's a tough read, I will say, because it does fly in the face of so many evangelical teachings about prayer and how God works and how God is in control of everything and God cares about the details of your life and, you know, God saves parking spots for people, things like that, like down to the minutia of life. We're taught in these evangelical circles that God is in control of all those things. And this book gave me permission to let go of that and see that God is not in control of all those things. So I can
Mm.
stop blaming him or being disappointed at God when things don't happen according to the way I pray. And it also has completely changed what prayer looks like for me. And I know that's going to be another episode. We have all of our thoughts on paper about that. But yeah, this has been huge, kind of reframing God, what God can and cannot do, and how to perceive suffering in the world.
So when you shared open relational theology, that's a term I wasn't familiar with, but when I look it up, it says that it's the defined by relationality. God and the world are mutually related. God is genuinely related to the creaturely world, and the creaturely world is intimately related to God. Hence, God is intimately involved in the affairs of the world, both acting within it and interacting with it. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes. I mean, I don't disagree with that. I would say for me, the definition of open and relational theology that really resonates with
Mm.
my experience and my struggle with petitionary prayer is recognizing that yes, God interacts, like you said, God interacts with the natural world. but God doesn't control the natural world. I think that's the
Mm.
huge kind of qualification that makes the biggest difference for me. Yes, God is
Okay.
engaged in the natural world. God is engaged with us. There is relationship on some level, but it
Hopefully.
doesn't look like what most evangelical teachings would portray as far as God being involved in our lives.
So then is there a difference between relational theology and open relational theology? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not entirely certain on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't speak specifically to that. I wish I
Mhm.
knew more. I haven't
Mhm.
done a deep dive into open and relational theology. I've heard it be spoken about on different podcasts and how Thomas J. Oord, that's what he subscribes to.
And
And so
then
that is what has developed this understanding of God can't for him
mhm.
in this book and making sense of suffering.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So if there's something that Carrie Jo and I talk about on this podcast, we want to say a caveat that we are not um professors
Nope.
or professionals in any way, shape, or form. So may what we share in part inspire you to dig deeper and understand some of these issues on your own.
Yeah, 100% agree. Not a
Mhm.
professor, don't intend to be one, just sharing what little knowledge we have about these things, so,
Exactly. No, I
yeah.
love it. That's awesome. Thomas J. Ord, he has a website too.
He does. He has a great Facebook page too, he shares a lot of his thoughts on there, and he'll share different podcasts that he's been interviewed on, so if this concept is intriguing to you, you can check him out. My
Mhm.
husband thinks he's a little outside of the box, like, he's a little I
A
don't
little
know.
too much for
Yeah,
him?
it's a little too much for him, and
Dot,
that's
dot,
that's
dot.
that's valid, you can feel that way for sure, that is not a problem.
I think the fun part about researching all this stuff is as soon as we share something or prescribe to a thought, like sometimes you carry that thought for a while and it influences how you believe or what you think of how you perceive the world around you. But um sometimes it only serves a purpose for a time, you know. Actually,
So
most of the time that's what these things do. Oh,
absolutely, 100% agree with that. As I was re-looking at this Inspired book by Rachel Held Evans, I thought, "Okay, that was pivotal for me in that moment of my process." But if I read that book again today, I would probably be dismissive of a lot of it just because the Bible holds a very different place in my life now.
Right,
So, all that to say, these things serve their purpose, and it's okay to move beyond that with
right.
time. I think that's
Yeah,
normal and natural, and it should be that way.
agreed. Yeah.
that's great. So what's your third thing?
Okay, third thing is an Instagram account, and this was super hard because I actually follow a ton of people on Instagram that share deconstructionist thoughts that really challenge your way of thinking, push the boundaries of evangelical teachings. But the one that I had to narrow it down to is called Naked Pastor. And if you're going to look that up on Instagram, do not put the word the in front of that. You will come up with a very different account. So it's just Naked Pastor. And the guy's name is David Hayward. He's an artist, and he challenges your ways of thought, or at least for me, my thought and my theologies through his artwork. He was challenging me. And I'm an artist, so I relate visually, so that was really powerful. And he's very LGBTQ affirming and does tons of cartoons about that. And they're really sweet. They're amazing. But that was one of the things that he really challenged me on, to be honest, and it's just so beautiful now that I'm standing in the same camp as him as being, like, totally affirming and loving and bringing this community into this fact that they are beautiful. They have
Mhm.
been created the way they are because it adds to the brilliance of the rainbow, and so he kind of, like, specializes in that, I would say, but he also does a lot of speaking out against church abuse and religious trauma and purity culture. So, if you go to his Instagram account, this is what he has to say. He says, "That's why I created this community, a place to use my art to push the boundaries, challenge our thinking, and create conversation. I believe everyone deserves the right to explore their spirituality, express their doubts and beliefs without restraint, and to be supported on their spiritual journey, or sorry, supported on their personal journey as they claim their own spiritual independence. And that just shines through. He's a very genuine person. I would love to have him on the podcast, see if we can get that to happen. He is just genuine and kind and supportive and loving. He's everything you want in a human. And his content has really pushed the envelope and expanded the boundaries of my thinking. So I'm really grateful to him for that.
This is the one out of all of our influences that we've shared that we do overlap.
Yes.
Because I agree. I really enjoy Naked Pastors, David Hayward. I really love his content and his heart and when he's talking. When there was a season where I felt like he was talking directly to me, and when he would share, encouragement on his Instagram account, and he looked directly at the camera, and it was like sometimes I would rewatch them, because I was like, I need to hear this as if this is my friend talking directly to me. So I confirm that David's an amazing guy and somebody definitely worth checking out.
Yes. Yeah, his warmth can be felt through the video.
Right.
He's just so kind and supportive.
Absolutely.
And I love that about him. So yeah, check him out. Naked Pastor, not the Naked Pastor. Just one more clarification.
Right.
I mean, unless you're into that, I don't know, but that's not what we're recommending at this point. So. Okay, we'll move on to the last 3. I have 2 podcasts. The first one is called The Bible for Normal People. And they say on their website, our mission is simple: bring the best in biblical scholarship to everyday people. Their values are curiosity, playfulness, and accessibility. And I think this also was really pivotal for me, probably around the same time that I was reading Rachel Held Evans, because of the importance that the Bible played in my life up to that point. I don't find it as useful to me in my journey right now, but that doesn't mean it's not valuable. So I would check it out if you are still struggling with figuring out how to reconcile, okay, like I don't agree with some of the things the Bible teaches. What do I do with that? I was taught the Bible is inerrant. What do I do with those tough passages of where God tells the army to dash babies' skulls against the rocks? I mean, that's gross, right? How do you reconcile that? And they have, any kind of passage you can find like that, they will have an episode about it, making sense of it, both culturally, politically, in the historical context that it was written, who it was written by, who it was written for, all of those things. They go into that. These are biblical scholars. They're not pastors. One is a former pastor, the other is a biblical scholar, and they come at it from an academic standpoint, which I love. It kind of removes a lot of the sacred tiptoeing from the process. When we are dealing with scripture, they are looking at cold, hard facts, and that's refreshing for me. So love, love, love the Bible for Normal People. My husband also has found that really helpful. So if you feel like you're maybe on the more conservative side of deconstruction, you want to stay in the Christian space, this is a really amazing resource for you.
That's great that you have a resource like that. I've never listened to that one, but I've listened to, I think, the Bible Project, I think is what it's called.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But not the Bible for Normal People. And I think the Bible Project is mostly, Christian, but it still was helpful in a lot of ways in my process. It's just another one of those things that was good for a time,
Right.
and better in transitioning to a different understanding of scripture.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what this podcast did for me. So I am very grateful for that.
It plays a role. Everything plays a role, and I think there's just with the information age, which, I'll be honest, like if we didn't have the internet and have all these resources, I'm not sure where I'd be spiritually.
Yeah.
I think the influence and it's like having our college at our fingertips, I recently started taking an online philosophy course. It's completely free. I didn't finish college, and so I get to go back and take classes at my leisure whenever I want, and it's amazing. I just am really happy that we get to have this awesome resource. And I was telling Ricky just yesterday, we're probably the last generation that knows what it's like to grow up without the internet.
Absolutely, we are. I was just having that conversation with somebody else the other day. That's funny.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And now that we have it though, we know the contrast.
right?
Absolutely. Yes.
In
It's
a
a
way that
stark contrast.
Right, in a way that no other culture genuinely does. I mean, obviously, like, our parents, and they probably actually know it a little bit better than we do, but I don't know that the generation older than us are really, as a whole, maybe in parts, but as a whole, are taking advantage of it to the degree that we are because we got into it a little bit sooner. But,
Right.
yeah, it's life-changing. All of us get to have the benefit of this resource, and it's amazing.
It is, and the fact that I'm in my car all the time, driving somebody to practice, bringing them home from a game, whatever, I'm constantly in the car running errands, and we live about 20 minutes from anywhere. Just happens that way. So I started using that drive time to listen to these podcasts, and I have hundreds of hours of listening to podcasts and academic podcasts, not just like crazy make you laugh stupid ones. I mean, I listen to those too, but to further your knowledge and your understanding of what you're going through in deconstruction and having access to these different intellectual academic minds is it's unreal. It is such a privilege. And the fact that it's free, are you kidding me? It's so amazing. I'm so thankful. I agree with you. I don't know where I would be in my faith journey if I didn't have access to all these things to kind of help me make sense of the weirdness of it. I mean,
Right.
it's such a weird process, and I'm grateful that it's been normalized for me.
Mhm. That's great.
So,
Yes.
what about the fifth one?
So, fifth one is another podcast. It is called The What If Project, and the host is Glenn Siepert. And we'll have all these links in the show notes, by the way. So if you're wondering how do I get in touch with this or check it out, we'll have all of that available for you. So no worries there. And he says, what if there are ways of thinking about God and faith that are different than what our traditions have handed us? And
Mm.
I love this guy. He holds on to the label Christian, but he's
Mhm.
let go of the harmful doctrines, the harmful teachings, and he is exploring different ways of spirituality that connect him with the divine. And one of the things that really, I think it was actually the thing that got me started listening to him was he uses tarot cards for self-reflection and kind of for journaling prompts or just being made aware of what's going on in his life and in his head and heart. And that really piqued my interest. I was kind of getting curious about that. So I actually reached out to somebody who's my sixth resource I will share in a minute, but he directed me to this podcast and it has been awesome. So if you are interested in Christianity and reconciling that with a lot of outside of the box ways of spirituality that might be intriguing to you, but might feel a little bit scary at the same time, Glenn is so kind and gentle and very encouraging and just helpful in helping you navigate those kind of trickier topics that you've heard be demonized from pulpits. He helps you navigate that with courage and kindness, and he's just great. He's a really great guy. I love hearing him interview people, and I feel like for me personally, my journey has maybe paralleled the things that he shares about his own journey. So that has been a really good one. Maybe it might be a little too far off the reservation for a lot of people, and that's cool. But for me, it's been really helpful.
Yeah, I've never heard of it once again, and I'm actually really curious to go check him out now. It's so hard for me to, in my mind, in the way I've understood Christianity, be able to mix this in the way that it sounds like he's mixing it with
Mhm.
other belief systems, you know?
Yeah.
And so that in and of itself is an interesting idea that I'm curious about, you know?
Yes, and he does a really great job of even just acknowledging, "This is working for me." I'm sharing he says, "I'm sharing with you my experience in hopes that it will help you," and it brings him so much joy to share about his journey, just like you and me. We're sharing about our journey, it brings us joy, it's fun,
Mhm.
and he's doing the same thing, and I love that he has refused to give up the label Christian. Personally,
Mm.
I've given it up. I
Yeah.
don't want what comes along with it, but he's hanging on to it, and you can hear, the various reasons why he shares about that in his podcast in different episodes, but yeah, he's a really great guy, really kind. Yeah, just super. What you would
Yeah,
expect and what you would hope for a human. He's
yeah,
amazing.
that's great.
Okay, and I alluded to the last one when I was talking about Glenn and the What If Project, but the last one is a person, which I hadn't even considered that could be a resource until Anna told me her list, and I was like, well, of course a person can be a resource. And this person, I'm just gonna give a little shout out. I took a class from him. It was a 90-day course, and it was all about reconstructing after deconstruction. And there were weekly Zoom calls. We had homework, and it was so helpful. It helped me make sense of the things I was questioning. It gave me some handles to hold on to find some stability in the process. And then, of course, I was exposed to other people who are going through similar things, and that is so powerful, obviously, knowing that you're not alone. So this guy's name is Keith Giles. He is amazing. He is also one of the most genuine, kind, gracious, compassionate people. I've probably listened to 90% of his podcast episodes, and he currently has 4 podcasts. Used to have 3, now has 4. But my favorite one of his is called The Heretic Happy Hour. And it's a little irreverent, so if that's not your thing, you're not gonna like it, but it's funny, it makes me laugh, it's challenging, it pushes the boundaries of what you think and believe, and again, that has continued from the start to now. That episode, or not episode, sorry, that podcast, Heretic Happy Hour, has been crucial in helping me make sense of things, but also not taking it so seriously. Like giving yourself permission to joke around and make light of it and to be a little irreverent. I think that has been a huge healing part of my journey.
The freedom to step outside of the box and explore thought, ideas. I mean, really, this is what the scholarly world is intended for, right? And I
Yes.
think the access to hearing from scholars and researchers, scientists on the internet, like we've talked about, has expanded the collective mindset about what's possible and how we can think outside of this religious box and still live a good life. you know?
Yes. Yes. And I love that not only thinking outside of the religious box, but you can totally walk away from that box. That box doesn't have to still be in your living room, you know? It
Mhm.
can be discarded if necessary, and it's really about finding a way forward with your new set of beliefs or understandings in a way that brings you peace, joy, contentment, happiness, basically all the things religious settings promise you but can't deliver on, and that's probably a different conversation for a different day, but it's important that we're listening to that voice inside and following the things that do bring life and encouragement and kind of makes your heart sing.
Listen,
Yeah.
I've been listening to Keith Giles lately too because we are going to interview him on
Yes.
our podcasts. I'm so excited.
Me too. I'm totally fangirling. I've been communicating with him and he's excited to do it. That's what I'm saying. Like he's not bigger than was it bigger than his britches? Too big for his britches? Is that
Too
how that
big for his
goes? He's
britches.
not too big for his britches. Like, he's so humble, and he knows that it's just me and you, and that we don't have a ton of followers yet, but he's willing to come on our podcast and take time out of his really busy schedule. I mean, he's also a co-owner of a publishing company. He has so much going on, and yeah, so cannot wait to interview him. That's gonna be
Yeah.
really exciting.
Yeah, that's gonna be a lot of fun.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing all of these
Yes.
influences. I know that as the podcasts continue to roll out, we're gonna share more and more because we can't help but, shout out to the people and that have helped us along our journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was fun. Okay, Anna, let's hear yours.
So I'm so excited. Okay. I don't know why this is fun to me. This is so fun.
It
But
is.
so yeah, the first thing I want to share is that this particular is the Hebrew roots movement. So for me, I had questions that led me to believe that either I didn't understand Christianity well enough and I needed a deeper understanding. Like for example, the problem with suffering or just hell in general is not really a Hebrew idea. And so I was like, well, if Jesus was a Hebrew and you know, it, this whole idea of hell is just kind of made up and added in over time, then like, what am I missing something? What am I missing about my faith? And this was, of course, years ago. And So I had come to a crossroads for myself where I decided either I was going to need to study the scriptures from a different standpoint, or go deeper in a way that I never had before, or I needed to start my process of letting go of it. That was a big crossroads for me. And so instead of walking away, last ditch effort, I went
Mhm.
deeper and started studying the language, and discovered this whole movement within Christianity that is generally referred to as Hebrew roots, but there's also a coined ism. Torahism is another term associated with this group, and they emphasize the adoption of Christians into the faith of Abraham, or the house of Israel. And it can be Jews, it can be non-Jews, it can be anybody. And they maintain faith in the Messiah, but there's a spirit-led adherence to the Torah and it's the teachings of God and the instructions. So that leads to this whole new way of perceiving the Bible. But what was comforting in that is, like, I felt like there was this whole other world of Christianity that I hadn't experienced or really dived into at all. And so that was a lot of fun for me.
Right.
So, like, it ended up initially being really beautiful and fun, and then it turned into more confusing, right?
And it sounds like it really opened up your maybe consideration, or maybe you were already there. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but allowing yourself to continue to ask the hard questions and realize, oh, okay, I thought this was going to provide more answers, but now there's more question marks than before.
Right.
So, was that one of the first major pieces of deconstruction for you? Kind of
That was the
catapulting
first
you?
major piece,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I can't help but mention it in my deconstruction process, because it was the last domino to fall, so to speak.
Yeah. And it's interesting if you just think of it as a concept. For you specifically, it was the Hebrew roots belief system. For other people, it might be stepping their toes into more progressive Christian thoughts.
Mhm.
Whatever it is, kind of outside of the box of your normal system of beliefs. Whatever is challenging that is going to serve a similar purpose as what the Hebrew roots system did for you.
Right.
Allowing yourself to ask those questions, allowing yourself to maybe tip your head to the side and say, I'm not so sure about that. Let me learn more. Let me dig deeper. And I think
Mhm.
for everyone that's gone through a deconstruction process, there has been something like that that has taken that general category of I can ask questions. I'm going to move forward with this. But it takes
Mhm.
a while to get to that point. It took me about 20 years to get to that point. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, the order in which these influences I share kind of all happen in the order that I'm giving, and so after finally getting to this point where I was like, I threw up my hands, you know, and I was finally able to say, I don't know what's going on,
Mhm.
and I've heard, for me that was huge to say the words I don't know, you know,
Right.
I don't know what's true. I don't know what's happening. I don't know how I got here, you
Yeah.
know? And when I was finally able to do that, like, we have an old friend named Timothy, and he's my second influence on this list. Timothy has been an amazing friend to us through our process, our deconstruction process. And we've known him for 30 years. So he was a Christian for a long time. He's also been deconstructed. We have lived together. We've raised our kids together. My husband and him have played music together. We've been through so much. We live across the country from each other now. And so all of our communication is via phone or video text or video chat. And we talk at least once a week. And there's times where we talk more than that because for various reasons. So Timothy is a life coach too, which it kind of tells you a little bit about his heart for people, right?
Yeah.
And so when I was going through all this, I started reaching out to I started I was vulnerable with him because at this point he had already deconstructed, and I knew that he was the only person that I really felt like I could talk to about what was going on. And so Ricky and I both started meeting with him a couple times a week on video chat.
just to process. And he was so patient and gentle and empathetic, even though he was way past where we were in our thinking. So in that process with him, I was able to grow more and more comfortable with being outside, like, because, coming out of Christianity, it feels very lonely. It feels very isolating. You feel kind of lost, like you don't know how to swim anymore, like you're in the middle of the ocean and you don't know how to swim. So one of the things that Timothy started helping us to do is to really just get a broader understanding of philosophy in general. And one of the things he brought up was epistemology.
Yeah, that's a big word. Can
Yeah,
you
it is a big
explain a
word.
little bit what that is?
And I'll read what I read online. I'll start there. The theory of knowledge, the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. It is concerned with the mind's relation with reality. So, in other words, what do we really know? And the nature, the origin, and the scope of knowledge in general. That, of course, naturally dives into the rationale of belief. Like, where do we get our beliefs? What can we truly know about anything that we think we believe?
And that
Um,
is I'm sorry, can I interject
please,
something? Yeah,
please, yeah.
that is what I feel like the foundation of evangelical teachings sits upon is certainty.
Uh-huh.
You have a question, I have a verse for that. Or you have a curiosity, God's ways are bigger than yours, you can't understand it. There's all these mechanisms for shutting down critical thinking, shutting down questioning, and there's certainty about everything. And so it can feel really scary to start to question those things. So I'm so thankful for people like Timothy and for like Keith and these people that play this role in the lives of those of us who were in the deep end not knowing how to swim anymore. It's super scary and
Yeah.
super hard to make sense of. And we need not just resources like podcasts and books and whatever else. We need people. Like we need real in the flesh people. And I can't emphasize that enough. I think for me, normalizing that questioning and what you're describing is like making sense of these things. Find somebody like Timothy, right? Who's a few steps ahead of you and can reach their hand back and say, "Hey, come along, like I've tread this path. Like let's do this together." And yeah, that's so beautiful. I'm so grateful for people like him.
Man, me too. So in my processing with Timothy and with my husband, I came to recognize that my beliefs were based on assumptions
Mm,
and or even completely false, but it helped me. It helped me tremendously. So that led to me doing more research and diving more into the science of thought, the study of how we think and how our brains work.
mm.
And so that leads me to my third influence, which is Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Have you heard of that at all?
I had not heard of that until you mentioned it earlier.
Okay. So he talks about the people's tendency to replace or avoid difficult questions with or in favor of ones that are much easier to answer.
Mm,
And he suggests people have too much confidence in human judgment. Talks a lot about our poor memory.
right.
Just in general, our minds don't remember things accurately, or sometimes we perceive our experience based actually most of the time, if not all the time, we perceive our experience and relay our experience based on the extremes only and not a lot of the in between. So when
Right.
a situation was really bad, it actually stirs up hormones in us that cause us to remember the really bad part and forget a lot of the details that led to the really bad part.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. Or vice versa, like the really low, like or really good or really bad, like one or the other. Those tend to be the things that we remember the most, and they're usually skewed by the feelings that we had when we were experiencing them.
Mm,
So he discusses it in his research on the brain, and of course he's an older man. He's done research for many, many years, and some of his research, now is being contested, but in general, like, it opened the door, like all good researchers do, to think about how we think very differently. One of his significant discoveries was the remembering self, like I just talked about. And then another one was understanding how the mind works, led to me thinking about how the Bible came about and who
Right.
these real human beings were and how they remembered their experiences. Or better yet, most of the writers, if not actually all of the writers, I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, it's just copies of copies, right? So we don't have any of the originals. So, a lot of people say the telephone game is unreliable, and some people say that oral tradition was more reliable than we think it was. There's all these conflicting perspectives on how we got to where we are. But for me, understanding how the brain works and the research that Daniel did helped me to see that even if you can pass down a story for generations and it be accurate, the original story could still be thwarted based on one human's ability to remember accurately what happened.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned earlier, there's always in a story, there's perception versus reality.
Mhm.
You and I can witness the same event. And if we are asked to report on that event, we are going to report it differently because a
Right.
different detail stood out to you than it did to me. I had a different vantage point than you did. It's just fascinating to think about the humanity of the writers of the Bible. When
Mhm.
you are able to let go of that inerrancy and realize, oh, God wasn't just, like megaphoning to them and they're writing word for word. No, they are humans. They were having a human experience. And whether or not they remembered that accurately or not, or they
Mhm.
embellished it to make, the crossing of the Red Sea this real grandiose thing to make a point. I mean, there was a lot of that in the writings too, of hyperbolic speech to make a point.
Good point.
And you get in trouble when you start reading scriptures like that through a literal lens. So it's fascinating that you followed this track of figuring out how the brain works and then tracing that back to the people writing the Bible.
Listen.
That is really interesting to me. Yeah, like
Yeah,
making
and
that
not
connection.
right. Actually, Timothy helped me with that a lot. And I felt like it was a helpful path to take, a helpful route, because it gets down to the foundations of what we think we know, right?
Right.
In addition to that, since then, I've come to understand that a lot of the stories that we're reading in the Bible are just repeats of other culture stories anyway, right? And
Right.
so there's a reason, on a broader sense, I'll get to that with one of my influences. I'll wait to share that thought until I get
Okay.
to that. So I wanted to read a couple of quotes by Daniel Kahneman. We are blind to our blindness. We have very little idea of how little we know. We're not designed to know how little we know.
That's both refreshing and devastating at the same time.
Exactly. And this one's a good one too. Nothing in life is as important as you think it is while you're thinking of it.
That's
That's
humbling.
a
I
good
like
one.
that.
It's a good reminder.
It is.
My fourth influence was a debate between Dr. Bart Ehrman versus Dr. Daniel Wallace. It blew my mind. And I probably listened to it 10 times over and over again. I kept rewinding it and playing certain parts over again and listening to it again because here was okay. And I'll give some credentials for who they are. This particular debate was on can we trust the text of the New Testament. It was done in 2011 at Southern Methodist University. And at the time, it was the largest attended debate on this text, on the New Testament text ever. Wow. So it was a huge deal. It was recorded, thankfully, and put on YouTube. So Ehrman, he's a distinguished professor at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He has a Master's of Divinity and a PhD from Princeton Theological Seminary. And I could go on and on about his accolades, but that's the basics. And then Dr. Wallace, he's a New Testament professor at the Dallas Theological Seminary, and he spent his life studying and digitizing ancient copies of the New Testament. So Ehrman asserts that we have good reason to believe that the New Testament text is not reliable, and Wallace believes that we have a good reason to believe that the New Testament text is reliable. And so that debate in and of itself was just the things that Bart shared were things that I'd never, ever, ever heard before.
Mhm.
And coming from someone who was as knowledgeable and experienced as he was in truly dissecting and understanding the New Testament, even though he went into it as a Christian and came out of his research a non-Christian. He calls himself an atheist, I think an agnostic atheist now, but was mind-blowing to me. And the more and more research I did on these types of scholars who are dedicating their entire life, their entire adult lives to understanding the text, and they were all coming to different conclusions. A good portion of them, probably more than ever now, are leaning towards not believing that the text is reliable, right?
Right.
We're seeing that more and more for sure. Bart has so many other debates as too online on YouTube. If you look at Bart Ehrman, BartEhrman, he has other teachings on the text and subjects of concern, in particular the problem with suffering, historical Jesus, how Jesus became God, and heaven and hell. All really great subjects that I've really enjoyed listening to him talk on. He has a blog called Ehrman Blog. They're currently giving out 3 months of free membership. It's all exclusive content that he puts out for all of his members. And he's exploring the New Testament from a scholarly, non-sectarian perspective. And 100% of the proceeds go to charity. So it's like $30 a year normally. You can, right now you can listen in or tune into his membership for 3 months for free, but it's so cheap anyway.
Right. And that's a no-brainer. It all goes to charity anyway. So
right, exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I'm going to share a couple of his quotes as well.
Yeah.
The Bible, at the end of the day, is a very human book. So simple, right?
Right.
But
hard for a lot of people to swallow. But
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. The problem then with Jesus, this is my favorite quote. The problem then with Jesus is that he cannot be removed from his time and transplanted into our own without simply creating him anew. That was huge for me because you kind of think Jesus is universal and transcendent of all time, right?
Right.
But we only make him that way.
Right. We contextualize him.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a normal human thing to do.
Absolutely.
But I think it does challenge the authenticity of the actual personhood of Jesus.
Listen. Yeah. Which is something we're going to get into with Keith Giles.
Yes.
He is going to talk with us on who is Jesus. It's going to be so fun. I can't wait.
Yeah, that's going to be an awesome conversation.
Yeah. So my last influence is Joseph Campbell. He died in 1987, and shortly before he died, Bill Moyer from public television, so a lot of you our age range are probably going to remember him, but in 1988, they put out the interviews, and Bill was the last person to interview Joseph Campbell, and it's the most popular series in the history of public television ever.
Wow.
That's fascinating. 6 one-hour conversations, and those conversations have been made into book form. You can find the videos on YouTube, and you can also find the books that pretty much say the same thing. Campbell was a professor of literature at Sarah Lawrence College and worked in comparative religion and mythology. He mainly discussed the archetypal hero that's shared by world mythologies. And he termed that concept as the mono myth. The archetypal hero was the mono myth. It's like all of the myths are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what he did in The Power of the Myth series, is explain why he thinks that and shared stories that connect.
That's a really cool, sorry.
No,
sorry,
go for
I
it.
just want to interject a little something.
Please do, because I could go on and on.
That is super cool to think about, looking at all these different cultures' stories or religious stories, because, I mean, the world is so diverse, right? Not only in belief systems, but food, fashion, all these things. We're so diverse, but at the core, we're still all humanity. We're still all humans with these same exact struggles. They might look different down to the minute details, but the struggles are the same. And the questions are the same about purpose and what happens when we die and all these things. So it's really fascinating to me to think about looking at various cultures myths and how these characters in the various myths might have different names and might have a few different attributes, but there's so much overlap because we're all humans and we're all having the same experience. I think that is so cool.
It's
If I
beautiful.
had another
Just
life, I think I would wanna do that. That is so intriguing to me.
to study it.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I can't wait. I'm gonna watch these YouTubes. It sounds really
Oh,
cool.
it's so beautiful. I mean, Joseph Campbell was just a phenomenal human being, and, so he talks about in these series, he talks about what's called the hero, the myth, the storytellers, the sacrifice. These are the commonalities,
Mm,
the bliss, the love, and the eternity. So he opened my eyes to a broader view of the stories that fuel our religions. And I love how he honors the stories, extracting the wisdom and the beauty while maintaining a healthy distance, not getting lost in any of the literal application, but embracing the metaphor. And I have a few of his quotes as well.
nice. Let's hear it.
God is a metaphor for for that which transcends all levels of intellectual thought. We must let go of the life we have planned so as to accept the one that is waiting for us. This is a commonality in the myth story as well.
Mm,
It is this is the last quote I have. It is going down into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure. Another
wow.
commonality within the myth stories. Highly, highly recommend this if you haven't seen it before. It is all you have to do is on YouTube put The Power of Myth or Joseph Campbell. It'll be one of the first things that come up.
Nice.
And what's interesting is I'm pretty sure that George Lucas got a lot of his influence from Joseph Campbell for the Star Wars series.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see, since people with Star Wars, with the dark and the light and the conflict and the may the force be with you and all that, right? Like that is a story, a myth story, so to speak, that George Lucas gave us that was heavily influenced by, I think, a lot of what he learned from Joseph Campbell.
Wow. That
Yeah,
that is so
so
cool. It makes
the
sense.
first
Being a
it does,
storyteller, right? I mean, George Lucas is a masterful storyteller.
right.
And of course, he's human. So he's going to be relating these stories to these ancient myths that are all related in some way. That is cool. I can't
Yeah,
wait. This is going to really open my eyes, especially anytime I watch a movie. I mean, there's always good and bad, right? There's the person you hate, there's the person you love, or there's a
mhm,
force against good and evil. And those are all commonalities in a great story.
yeah. So that dualistic way of looking at things, I'm realizing comes with conflict, right? And life
Sure.
is full of conflict. Most
Yeah.
people are running from this dualistic perspective. And that's something I really enjoy about Joseph Campbell's work is that he didn't run from it, he embraced it, but he sucked the marrow out of it, and it actually fueled for him his own bliss and
Mm.
gave him more freedom to see everything as a metaphor.
Wow. That's a beautiful way to move through the world.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Those are all my influences that I have to share.
Ooh, thanks for sharing. That
Yeah.
was
That
amazing.
was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
And it's
And we
fascinating. Like you and I, we find ourselves maybe in a similar space of belief in our what we feel like we understand at this point, but it took very different routes for each of us to get there. And I
with
think
the
that's so beautiful and diverse and colorful and like all the beautiful things of how people are so different, but we're still so the same in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that I get the privilege of continuing to learn even though, like, I haven't arrived anywhere.
Right.
That's
I
the
don't
fun
know that
part.
there's a destination. I feel like
Right.
it's just the journey. It's the day by day, the moment by moment, enjoying it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
saying I don't know and then being more and more comfortable with not knowing and just enjoying the process has been huge for me. Because so much of within Christianity is about certainty, like you said earlier.
Mhm.
And there's one continual truth in my life is that there is nothing that is certain.
Right. Right. And it was so freeing for me to actually admit that.
Listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give like a little maybe clarification because I realized as we were talking about deconstructing about not only ourselves, but other people and saying that they are no longer Christians. And that
Mm.
is one potential place to find yourself after deconstructing, but it's not the only, because I think there's this misunderstanding and misrepresentation of deconstruction, especially within evangelical teaching arenas, that deconstruction leads to deconversion 100% of the time. And it does
Right.
not. It does not. My husband still strongly identifies as a Christian, and he has gone through a deconstruction process. I no longer identify as a Christian. I've gone through a deconstruction process. Glenn Siepert, I mentioned the podcast host. He has deeply deconstructed, maybe even more so than me. He still identifies as a Christian, and they're all valid. So I just kind of wanted to point out the diversity of the journey of deconstruction and that it doesn't always end in deconversion.
Yeah. I find myself when some people ask me, like there's people proselytizing on the streets or something, and they will say, hey, do you know Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior? I just say yes.
Right.
For me, I have known Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And the story has changed my life for the better in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
Now, we can definitely get into the negatives of Christianity for sure. But in general, the story of Jesus and who I learned who he was is changed my life for the better.
Yeah, and I would
And
100% agree with that for myself as well.
yeah. So does that make me a Christian? Maybe,
Right.
you know,
Right. It's
maybe
such a
not.
nuanced thing, and it's probably a conversation we should have on here as an episode because, wow, it's complicated, there's a lot to unpack, and I think that could be a useful thing to unravel for people.
Yes, Ellen. Yeah, I agree. You ready to wrap it up for today?
I'm ready. This was awesome. Love you. Thanks for
I love you.
sharing.
Yeah, you too.
Peace out, Emma. Well, friends, that wraps up this heretical episode. Thanks for listening, and be sure to rate and review our podcast and share with anyone who would be encouraged. See you next time.